Globalization: Impact of Global Capitalism on Latin America by Maggie Abels. Globalization is the process by which the experience of everyday life, marked by the diffusion of commodities and ideas, is becoming standardized around the world. Some important things that factor into globalization are the movement of peoples, level of communication and technological services, economic activity, and international agreements. It is complicated by different expectations such as standards of living, cultures, values, and legal systems. Overview of globalization in Latin America. After World War II, there was a great drive to industrialize, which started the ball rolling for Latin America to become involved in globalization. Over time, Latin America has begun to see surpluses of new chains, malls, and superstores placed throughout Latin America that are owned by transnational businesses, new communities built for the workers who provide cheap labor, many of whom are immigrants, new trading patterns that connect Latin America commercially to many other countries, a transformation of the economy and social organization, and the creation of factories and maquiladoras which brought with it the exploitation of the factory worker. Furthermore, globalization in Latin America was characterized by the access of transnational corporations to Latin America's natural resources and abundant lands, but this created great social inequality and social stratification among populations. Urban migration and urbanization. Globalization began with urban migration and urbanization. People began moving from rural to urban areas looking for a way to take part in this drive to industrialization, modernization, and therefore globalization. Urbanization permitted the first dramatic elaboration of division of labor, creating organic and mechanical solidarity, and permitted stratification and inequality. With the involvement of Latin America in global capital, many people began to immigrate to Latin America for a plethora of reasons. There were jobs associated with industrialization, people could learn more about the concept of modernization, and work became consistent rather than inconsistent seasonal work. In the 1950s, 41% of Latin America was urban, and it is estimated that by 2030, 83% of Latin America will be urban. Those countries that are particularly urban include Argentina, Chile, and Venezuela, and those that possess low urban areas include Haiti and Belize. Views of structural functionalists and power conflict theorists. Structural functionalists view urban migration as a product of modernization in which rural mechanization is prevalent, as well as tax abatement easements. They believe creating jobs is the most important thing in society, then creating infrastructure for neighborhoods, and then improving healthcare and education for all. On the other hand, power conflict theorists argue that global capital investment leads to within-country migration, and it also leads to between-country migration. Furthermore, they argue that there is low infrastructure in sending countries, and the conflict in sending countries is always linked to global capitalism. Research highlights that the distribution of wealth in the world's income is extremely uneven and skewed. Europe boasts 34% of it, North America 28%, Asia Pacific 22%, and Latin America a meager 4%. For this reason, Latin America must work even harder at producing more goods and commodities for the rest of the world so they continue to participate in global capital with other countries and continue to stay globalized. As a result of this unequal distribution of world income, many people in Latin America possess absolute poverty, which is a lack of resources so much so that it's life-threatening, where 100 million children in poor countries are forced to work the streets. Women are often involved in the maquiladora factories, and their work is unrecognized, undervalued, and they go severely unpaid. In fact, most of the labor in sweatshops is female, and 70% of the 1 billion people living near absolute poverty are women. An example of this can be seen in the book Genders in Production by Leslie Salzinger, in which women are treated poorly and unjustly and viewed as constantly inferior to the male race, always paid less and given worse jobs. Therefore, the role of women in globalization results in them being exploited and a source of very cheap labor. Technology is lacking in Latin America, and as a result, nearly a quarter of the people in low-income countries use animal or human power for farming rather than machinery, and many resist innovation. Furthermore, there is great social stratification evident in Latin American countries due to global capital, which is evidenced in the great inequality between the poor and elite. Furthermore, there is gender inequality, where men are viewed as the superior race and often dominate the inferior women. There exist many multinational corporations in Latin America, which are huge businesses that operate in many countries, like Coca-Cola, Nike, or Levi's. It is important to understand the basic assumptions of new urban sociology, as they are the principles of global capital. The first is that cities are hierarchical global systems in which exploitation exists, and they are defined by how a region fits into the international division of labor. Next, the world system is competitive capitalism in which everyone is trying to access capital, cheap labor, and resources. Furthermore, capital is easily moved, but the locations of cities are fixed. Lastly, politics and governments are extremely important, as the state is linked to the process of forming cities, and the government plays a role in setting rules and creating optimal conditions for business profitability. Conclusions. Latin America's integration into new global production came after the economic crisis post-World War II in Latin America. And overall, global capitalism played an extreme impact in Latin America as it became the playground for modernization policies and global capitalism. There were many industrial shifts for populations moving to urban areas, and one of the most prominent aspects of globalization in Latin America were the maquiladora factory systems, which produced the largest and most consistent labor force. Globalization created a new capitalist class as well as a new working class that dominated the continent. The factory system in Latin America left the legacy of the exploited worker that was underpaid and overworked, and created a large disparity between the poor working class and the upper class elite. Globalization in Latin America disrupted many local communities with the creation of transnational corporations and created huge migrations of populations, but allowed for Latin America to play a role in the ever-changing global relations.